Welcome to Seniority Authority, the podcast where I track down experts to answer your questions on aging. I'm your host, Kathleen Toomey. Let's get smarter about growing older. If you're thinking about that next big step, retirement, do you have a plan for what your life will look like? Or is it hard to visualize? After all, it's likely that if you're 65, you will have another 20 plus years to live. And that's a lot of golf. If this sounds familiar to you, stay tuned. Today's guest has literally gone back to school to learn about aging, our new choices, and how to create a new plan for your life. And he's got suggestions for you. My guest, Joe Casey, is a fellow podcast host, the Retirement Wisdom podcast, and author of Win the Retirement Game, Outsmart the 9 Forces Trying to Steal Your Joy. I love that title. Joe runs an executive coaching practice that includes how to design a meaningful life in retirement. A former HR executive with Merrill Lynch, Joe returned to school at age 60 to get a master's in gerontology from University of Southern California. He's a certified Designing Your Life coach and was named one of the 23 innovative coaches by Business Insider. A multi-marathon runner, Joe has a national practice and is based out of Princeton, New Jersey. If you're getting smarter, let us know. Leave us a review or rating wherever you listen to podcasts. Tell your friends and follow us on social. We're at Seniority Authority on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. And don't forget, if you're listening to YouTube, hit the notification bell so you can subscribe. Or subscribe to our newsletter at seniorityauthority.org so you don't miss a thing. Thank you so much for joining Seniority Authority, Joe.
Great to be here, Kathleen. Thanks for inviting me.
You have a lot of wisdom, and especially in this area, which is something I think a lot of people don't focus on. But you not only focused on it, you also live what you preach since you went back to school when you were 60 and launched a new career. When you contemplated going back to school, did you have a specific career in mind, Joe?
So I was an undergrad psych major, went into human resources right out of school, worked the entire time for 30 years. And then our company was acquired by Bank of America in 2009. And I had time to decide what I wanted to do next. I considered staying. I knew I wanted to do coaching afterwards, but I was only 52. I thought, well, I'll probably do that later. But I said, why not now? I have the ability to take time and do it. So I went back to school then, at that time, for training in executive coaching and master's in executive coaching. And then as I get into launching executive coaching practice, I had clients start to ask me, hey, can you help me figure out what to do after this? Because I don't want to be here when I'm 60. I want to do something else. I had one client who wanted to retire at 55. He was 52 at the time. I became curious about how that works. And I figured if I'm going to really help people figure out what to do with the rest of their lives, I better figure out what the research says and know more about it. So that's why I went back for the gerontology degree. I had never been old before, so I figured it might come in handy for me too. And I really was exposed to a lot of great faculty and fellow students, great research on really getting older, because there's a lot of things that are counterintuitive, a lot of myths that are incorrect, and a lot of things that we just aren't aware of.
Oh, that sounds so fantastic, to really do a deep dive and study the science and then apply it versus just your typical coaching skills. Speaking of coaching, one of the many certificates that you have is with Bill Burnett and Dave Evans at Stanford. And they create a process and a book, of course, called Design Your Life. What makes that process special as a way to plan your next chapter?
I think like anything that helps us grow, it gets us out of our comfort zone. And that's the biggest thing. It really, through a series of very elegantly designed exercises, gets us to think a little differently and to envision the future, but also to conduct experiments, to not have to figure it all out in a linear fashion, but to, as Dave Evans likes to say, iterate your way along the way. So they take the principles of design thinking and apply it to the future. And it's very good for any stage of life. The book was written based on the undergrad course that they've taught for, I think, about 15 years now. But they learn very quickly. They can apply to all stages, mid-career. And I really enjoy applying it to people in later life who are looking for that next opportunity after they graduate from the world of full-time work.
Yeah, I like that. I like graduate from the full-time work. I'm going to a retirement party on Thursday. I'm going to be using that line with my friend. So is this retirement coaching? Is this a new concept, Joe?
It's pretty new, although I think it just takes a lot of the career coaching and extends it. There are a lot of new entrants in the field. There's different levels of training. Some, in my opinion, experience are very light, so be careful. But I think what it really is people value having someone who's a trusted thought partner who can help them figure out different options going forward, which path to take. In the design of your life process, we look at 3 alternative visions for the next 5 years. And then we have conversations, or clients have conversations with people. We're doing those things that they might want to do, doing them today. And I just finished 2 groups in the last 2 weeks that I launched in January. And it was great to see people. I learned so much from my clients all the time. People start off with an idea, but band their thinking and test some things and end up launching new lives.
Tell us a little bit about your group practice. I know you work individually with people,
Yes.
but you just mentioned some of your groups graduated. Tell our listeners what that's all about.
So I created the group process to make it more accessible because I would get some emails from podcast listeners and others saying, I love your stuff, but what are you doing for people like me who can't afford to hire you one-on-one? And so bring a small group together. It's usually between 6 and 10 people. And for 3 months, every other week, we get together, do the exercises in between, and then in small breakout groups, discuss people's insights. They learn so much from each other, but you basically go through the way. 3 phases. The first phase is clarifying values and priorities. What's most important to you now? Second phase is idea generation. The fun part, really looking at what's possible. What are the options? Those 3 alternative visions of the next 5 years. And then prototyping, really testing experiences, trying some things out, test driving some things, or talking to people who are doing what you might want to do. So people have talked to people doing volunteer activities or part-time jobs, consulting, teaching on the side, all kinds of different things. I had people in previous ones. I had one person go back to culinary school, not professionally, but he just wanted to really learn how to cook well and show off at it. But a lot of different activities.
I could go back to culinary school, but just for the basics. It never really stuck with me. So I think it's interesting. This sounds like a great process. And it feels to me that, and this may be wrong, but it feels to me that people who are thinking about retirement could be especially stuck in their ideas of themselves that they've baked into day-to-day experiences for 60 years. So it feels to me like people need help breaking out of that.
Yes, in several ways. One, seeing, hey, there are a lot of possibilities. It's not just doing what your brother-in-law did or your neighbor or your sister. You can really create what's really key for you. And for some people, that includes looking back to things they used to love to do before spending all the time on their career and revisiting them, or something that they always wanted to spend time on, but couldn't. And now they will have the time. Most of the people I work with end up creating a portfolio of new activities. Some include work, continued work in some part-time way or volunteering, but there's always a learning activity. There's always some type of health and wellness thing, getting back in shape for the first time in many years, perhaps. And there's community-based things, relationship-based things. But they usually have a couple of different options they're looking at together.
One of the things that I love about your book is the subtitle, which it refers to outsmarting the forces that steal your joy. What are those forces that steal our joy?
So what I did is I went back through all my clients that I've worked with and thought, what did they have the hardest time with? What was in their way? What did they have to solve for? And I came up with 9. No client faced all 9. No client had to grapple with them or defeat all 9, but there were usually 2 or 3. And some of the most common ones, the first one right off the bat, particularly for us men types, was boredom. They really were fearful of coming off a dynamic, interesting career and then having a blank sheet on their calendar. And so how are they going to invest their time became one big thing. And the antidote there is curiosity, really being curious about things you could do, being willing to try some different things and experiment. The other one that really came is connectivity. A lot of, and again, this is a little bit, I'd say about 60% of my clients are men, 40% women. But I learned a lot of time ago, I've been married for 42 years, that we're not as smart. We're not as prepared for some of these things in general. Sorry to generalize, but in my experience, it's been true. And so one of the things, a lot of people, and men in particular, I've found so far, have a lot of the social connectivity tied up to work. And then when that changes, they're really adrift. So they have to really find a new tribe. So that's a big one, is really getting the right social connections. And then the other one that really surprised me at first is what people get wrong about retirement sometimes is you need to have something challenging you. Just because work's gone away, it sounds great to have just a vacation, time off, total freedom. But what people really miss about work is that challenge, not the overwhelming part of it, but getting better at something, accomplishing something. And so there are things you can do that maybe, again, of great interest to you, that you can take up for the first time or pick back up again and really start to try to master and get better at it. And there's a lot of value in just having something in your life that's going to challenge you a little bit and push you a little bit.
That sounds very intuitively correct, that people want to be challenged. And I totally agree with the men thing. Not so much that you're not smart, but men, I think, are typically less good at creating relationships. And so they rely on either their partner or their work to do that. And they're not used to initiating it. But that's a new skill you can cultivate.
Absolutely. Another one that came up was giving up, keeping up with the Joneses, other people's expectations. If you're in a career, there's expectations from people around you at your particular level or what you do, profession, or your neighbors. And you reach a certain point with retirement where you have that freedom where you say, look, I don't need to play that game anymore. What's really right for me? What's right for my family? What are the things that I want to do now? It's really me time.
That sounds very satisfying. But it can be hard if you are extremely self-referential as a person. If you get your sense of worth by comparing yourself to other people, then that's learning a whole new way to achieve satisfaction.
Absolutely.
That's a big change.
It's a different mindset, and it requires some reflection and really some planning to be able to start to take that one on. But it's very liberating when the people do it.
Yeah. It just sounds like this is a very transformational process for people, and a process that people need help with. In your book, you share some great anonymous client stories about people who get stuck when they can't think of a next chapter or can't figure out their next passion. And I think there's so many people that experience this. Tell us about one tactic you use in your experience with your clients to help them get unstuck.
I'll share one because it was a learning experience for me. I tend to be optimistic, future-oriented, think about the possibilities, what could be. And I was working with an engineer who confessed to me, I'm really afraid of retirement. I'm terrified. He was retiring in 6 months. He said, because I'm going to be bored. And it's okay. Well, we can work on that. And so what are the types of things you like to do? He said, well, this is the problem. I've literally done nothing but work. I'm all in about work. I don't have any outside interests.
Oh, no.
So I said, okay, well, I like challenges. So we'll take this one on. And we started to work on some of the exercises, some of the different techniques that we have to try to get at that. And then one day I realized this is really hard. This is a challenging one. Why isn't this taking off in the direction that I expected to or the others do? And I realized it wasn't him, it was me.
Really?
I was taking him forward, which is what he was afraid of. So I decided, let me go backward. So I asked him, would you be willing to just go back in time and let's take decade by decade what were the things that you really did like to do before you became your professional self? It's okay. So we went childhood, teenage years, college, pre-professional, early professional life, and things started to emerge. And of that group, he started to pick off things that we talked about. Well, would you like to try those again? Can you bring those back? Start slowly, but which of those? And suddenly, activity 1, 2, 3, 4, interest 1, 2, 3, 4 came back. And there were different things that he did. Really loved, he was very, very into reading, brought back a practice to reading, loved working out, did some different things, brought back one of his exercise routines. And then the kicker was he actually started a volunteer activity, which was reading to inner city children because I enjoyed that earlier in life with his children. So it was because I took him backward, that led him forward. So it was a big learning experience for me.
That's great. And what a great idea, because you're bringing back to before a time when he was defined by his job and what he could do, what he could accomplish and contribute, and going back to those really initial, very, very impactful experiences when you're younger.
Our careers can be like a solar eclipse, but if you start to get some more visibility, the joy can sneak back in.
I love that. What do you think holds the majority of people back from planning their next chapter? I think personally, and the reason that I was really excited to talk to you, and I really want people to listen to your podcast and read your book, is that people, when you say retirement, they initially think of finance, which makes sense. You need money, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, money, food, shelter. But I think a lot of people are frozen when they think about what next. Do you think that's cultural, or where do you think that comes from?
I personally believe it's from staying in one lane, meaning the financial side, which you have to take care of. It's not easy, but you got to make sure you're not going to outlive your money. It's a left brain thing. It's quantitative, it's linear, it's predictable. You can focus on it and come up with a certain answer. But if you stay in that lane, you stay in that mode, that left brain mode, you're missing a whole nother side of the equation, which is the right brain side, which is more creative. I had one of my podcast guests, Brian David Johnson. He wrote a book called The Future You. He's a futurist. And he said, the biggest tool you can bring to your retirement planning is imagination. And I think that really captures it. That if you really start to imagine what could be using your time, you can balance out the financial planning. It's not either or. You need to do both, but you need to change mindsets to really get at that second thing. You can do some of it in a linear fashion, but it really takes some experimentation, takes some being open to the different ways of thinking.
Well, and I think it's easier in our culture to talk linear and to say, I'm setting aside money for retirement, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. It's harder to say, I'm experimenting. I am thinking about what I'm going to do, and I might fail and I might try something and then abandon it. And we're a little bit puritanical in that in the US, like work hard, but to just say, I'm just going to wander around for a little bit.
But it's very freeing. It's very liberating when you do that. Had another great podcast guest who I think has figured this all out. Andy Robin, he wrote a small book called The Tapas Life. He said when he was in his career, it was really like a full course meal with a giant steak hanging over the side. So, but when he retired, he said, I'm going to use a small Spanish meals. I'm going to try one thing, add another over time, add a third. You got up to 6. And he discovered if one doesn't work, it's not like professionally where there's consequences. I can just curtail that and move on to the next thing. So I think that's a useful way to think of it. What would your tapas retirement look like? What would be the small things you could try and go with? But it is, people find it very interesting when you talk to them about it. Well, I'm trying this, I'm trying that. They get more engaging, because a lot of times if you're running into, I don't go to cocktail parties. I'm more of a backyard barbecue type of guy. But if someone said, what do you do? They expect an answer. But you say, well, I'm doing a little this, a little that, and working on this. And it leads to a very engaging conversation. People are very intrigued.
Yeah, it opens up the conversation as opposed to, I'm an engineer, period. That's it.
Or worse, I'm retired. I'm a former XYZ.
Oh my gosh. It's one thing we really focus on at Riverwoods, where I work at Continuing Care Retirement Community, that you don't say, he was the former COO of XYZ Corporation, or she was you're still alive, you're still there. And, she's exploring making her own loom and weaving tapestries. We are still a viable life. And to say was, retired, retired, retired. I love that idea. I think that's a great answer. When someone says, what do you do? And you say, I'm living a tapas life. I'm doing lots of things. I love that imagery.
I'm trying this. I'm working on that. It's very engaging. And you'll find people will be naturally curious and they'll want to know more and they'll want to compare notes and they'll be very jealous.
They'll be very jealous, and you might inspire someone else to start doing this. So if our listeners have decided this is something that they want to do, they want to be thoughtful about their next chapter, and they want to chart their own course, assuming you retire at 65, or just using that as put a pin in that, when should they start thinking about what they want to do?
So most of the people I work with are about a year out. Some are thinking ahead, they're a year and a half or 2 years. The earlier, the better, because it gives you more time to experiment and play with. But I think that year and a half, 2 years is ideal.
And is that what most of your clients do? They come to you a year and a half?
They're about a year out, and they wish they started earlier.
Okay. And in your practice, you do a lot by Zoom. So even though you're based in Princeton, you work with people all over the country, correct?
Yes, so I do. So I have an executive coaching practice where my clients are large companies. So I do in-person things mostly in New York City, about an hour north of here, and some in DC, some in Boston. But on the retirement side, it's all from all across the country. And I learned, as I mentioned, so much from different clients, whether they're individual or grouped together. It just opens up new possibilities. People have developed new connections from these group programs. And we're all used to technology. We're all expert on Zoom now. And It just allows for very productive conversations. So it's usually about 3-month process with 60 to 90-minute Zoom engagements.
Tell me where our listeners could go to sign up for your group.
The website is retirementwisdom.com. If you go to the upper right-hand corner, you schedule a call. It's not a sales call. You should probably tell I'm not a salesperson. But it's a call where I can talk you through just here's how the group works. Next one starts in April. The next one after that will be in September. But I'll talk about the one-on-one versus that. What are some of the pros and cons? The pros to the group process are people learn from each other. The downside is you don't get the same individual attention. But I like to just have a conversation to get a sense of where people are at and be able to give them a recommendation what I think is best for them. So it's a no obligation, free call. That's the best way to do it.
That sounds terrific. And while our listeners are there, please make sure to check out the Retirement Wisdom podcast. Joe does a phenomenal job. He has a lot of great guests. And you've been at this podcast a number of years. Tell me, what was one of your favorite interviews and why?
Been so many. So I've done it for 6 years now. And I like it because it engages my curiosity. I get to read a book a week, interview some of the people, and just great to have conversations. The one that I would highlight, I thought a lot about this because there are a lot of possibilities, but then I want to highlight, interviewed a woman by the name of Catherine Sanderson. She's the chair of the psych department at Amherst College. I went to UMass Amherst, so it's down the road, not as fancy as Amherst College, but I used to go study in the Amherst College library. Anyway, she wrote a book called The Positive Shift. And the reason I like that conversation, one, was she's hysterically funny, but also very knowledgeable, a great storyteller, is she really underscores the fact that in later life and retirement, no matter what we do, money's important, but our best asset, our most valuable asset is our attitude. And a lot of those things are really controllable. They're really modifiable. You can, she confessed, have a pessimistic lean, but still learn, as Martin Seligman, University of Pennsylvania, taught us, you can learn to be optimistic, you can learn to be positive, and it has a ripple effect in your life and on others.
That is wonderful. I have not heard of that book, so I'm going to scribble it down along with some of the other books that you mentioned, and I will be putting those and the links in our show notes, along with the link to Joe's book, Retirement Game, Outsmart the 9 Forces Trying to Steal Your Joy. Just diving into some of these books is a great way to kickstart your thinking in your brain. I want to just quickly step back to that one question about retirement coaches. What is the state of retirement coaches? People can go to your website, they can sign up for the group or the one-on-one, but there are a lot of coaches out there and they're not all necessarily vetted in the same way. You've got masters in coaching, masters in gerontology. If you had to suggest something to look for in a retirement coach, what would that be, Joe? Or is there an association nationally?
There's an association, but it's an association that figured out there's a lot more money in training retirement coaches than doing retirement coaching. So beware. I think the training is important. And my advice in looking for a retirement coach is you just go into it knowing that you're not trying to hire a friend. So it's not the person you're going to necessarily like the most. You want to have good chemistry. That's important, but it's not enough. You want someone who's going to be able to help you get to where you want to go. So it's like if my car breaks down on the highway and I have to call a mechanic, I want someone who knows my make and models. Even though he or she might be a nice person, I don't want the carpenter that has a great sense of humor. I need someone who can help me get from where I want to go. So I think really look at what are you trying to do, and does that person have the experience and qualifications to help you get there? Most times there are a lot of good people going into retirement coaching as a second career. There are a lot of talented people in the space. But there are some who've gone through light training programs who think they're trained coaches and haven't done really the homework. It's not necessarily their fault, but I would kick the tires. And the questions I encourage people asking is, what's your coaching approach? Mm-hmm. And what's it based on? If they struggle with that question, then I think you just have to kick the tires a little further. But get an understanding of what their experience is, ask for references, and see how they respond to that. And really just do your homework and hire the person who can help you. And I would also not commit to a predetermined package. When I do the individual coaching, I just have it, you can leave at any time for any reason. And I think that's important to ask for because you want to make sure it's working right, that you're not being sold, you're being really entering into a partnership. It's an important work and you want someone who's going to help you get there.
Well, I love your analogy about being stuck on the side of the road because also it's like a lot of consultants or people that you're working with, you want there to be an end point. You want to get the car back on the road. So especially if it's a retirement thing, you want to get some direction and then go. You don't want to spend your entire retirement talking to a retirement coach.
Absolutely. You want someone who's going to be a fit for you. And there are a lot of great people out there doing this work. Make sure they're qualified, make sure they're fit for you, and make sure that you can end at any time. If it's not working, make sure you're not being sold a package that locks you in.
Is there anything that I haven't asked you about considering your next chapter that you would want the listeners to know?
Our futures are often not solo. Sometimes they are, but if there are other people in your life, make sure they're part of the journey as well, meaning share what you're learning, share some of the resources, share your thinking, and get their point of view also. I think that's very helpful. Some of the people who have gone through my one-on-one and group programs will use some of the same tools with their spouses. If I've coached couples, that's not my forte. That's not what I'm looking to do. I'm not a trained marriage counselor. But the tools can apply and can lead to some very good discussions because one of the things that if people are in a relationship, they often don't talk about this topic very much at all. There was a fidelity study that came out a number of years ago that the majority of people, they separated the spouses, kind of like the old dating game. And they asked them, when's the other one going to retire? And more than half got it wrong.
Wow. That's big. That's really big. Yeah, I think that is important because when you retire, there's an impact on your spouse too. My dad is an entrepreneur, and I remember when he was getting ready to sell his business, and my mom said, "You have to find something to do because I am not your secretary. You are not gonna. I have lived my own life. You're not gonna start organizing me, when you're gone." So, luckily, he did something completely different.
One of my favorite titles of a retirement book was "I Married You Forever, but Not for Lunch."
That's great. That is awesome. Yeah, very, very appropriate. Well, you've been such a great guest, and we know you're a dedicated and energetic consultant, but let's take a little bit more knowledge about Joe Casey. Just a fast five. What is your favorite guilty pleasure?
If I'm in a store and I'm walking through and I see the words Australian licorice red, I
Oh,
have a hard time going past it. I will try, but that's my thing.
all
Guilty
right.
pleasure.
Yeah, all right. That's pretty good. What's your favorite healthy practice?
Really exercise. So I'm a runner. I'm an injured runner, but I still run on a machine indoors every day, and I've supplemented with walking. So any kind of movement, working out 6 out of 7 days usually. That's my thing. So that's the
Wow.
biggest thing.
That's the silver bullet as far as I'm concerned, too. Is the secret of aging is good exercise. Another one is laughter. What's guaranteed to make you laugh, Joe?
Well, right now it's our 1-year-old, just turned one, granddaughter. She a few months ago started to just roar. So whenever I get on with her FaceTime, we're in person once, twice a month. She will start and end every call with this roar. And it just cracks me up every time. She just gets on and roars. She's not talking yet, but and she only does it with me. And so
Oh,
that's
oh, that's
yeah,
awesome.
it's become our thing. It could start with the beginning of calls, and then when she would sense that the call was going to end, because we're talking to our daughter and her husband, she would then bring back the roar to extend the call a little longer. Notice that. So it's become a tradition.
So do you roar back?
I do.
Let's hear it.
Well, I would just do that. Roar. It's just every single time. We would do that sometimes for a couple of minutes. So it goes on. She won our family football pool regular season and playoffs. So,
Hey, she's pretty good.
Yes.
She roars and she's a football fan.
Yes.
She's got quite the future ahead of her.
We thought she was only picking teams with animals who roar, but she went beyond that.
That's awesome. You read a lot. You read more than I do, I think, which is a lot. Tell us about the last book that you loved.
I try to read nonfiction not as much as I used to, so I'll hold on that one. But the one that I would highlight that I've read recently that I really like is Live Life in Crescendo. It's by the late Stephen Covey and his daughter, his eldest daughter, Cynthia Holler Covey. I really got a tremendous amount out of Stephen Covey's work throughout my corporate and personal life from the age of 29 on. And so it's something I touch base with his 7 Habits every New Year's Day because I like pro football better than college football. So, but I just start the year by pulling it back out and reconnecting with it. But it took her 10 years to finish the book, but it was his last work. And it's really about really living life to the fullest and what you need to do to be able to do that. And again, mindset and attitude. But I always found his work to be very useful and practical and profound because it was based in principles. And this one's no different. But she took his concepts, interviewed him, and turned it into this great book about living our later life. The contrast was crescendo, the musical, going up.
Yeah.
The opposite is diminuendo, which is diminishing. And so that's the basic part of the book is which choice are you going to make? And what do you need to do to live one versus the other?
Oh, that sounds fabulous. All right, I'm getting a lot on my TBR stack. What's your favorite escape?
For me, it's sports. So my wife says I'm the only person she knows who wants the same thing for his birthday as when they were 10 years old, which is true. For me, it's the Red Sox. I'll be there next Thursday.
Good.
Freezing.
Freezing as
1 o'clock
as
game.
you should.
Yes.
Oh, fantastic.
So for me, it's sporting events. Go to local college basketball games here. Anything in person, NBA. One NFL game a year. This year went a friend of mine. We go to one game on a road trip. This year we went to LA to see the 49ers play the Rams. That was fun. But always sporting events, I think, for me are key.
That's fantastic. Wonder, did you play sports other than running? Are you a football, basketball guy?
I was a basketball fanatic. So I played on a very good team. It was my life's mission. That's all I did during my high school. That was my main focus. And ran cross country because if you didn't play football, back then they made you. We played 3 sports. I ran track and ran cross country. So but basketball was my main focus. Still has played till I was 40 in corporate leagues, and then switched to running marathons. But I had 2 injuries. I actually had gone to a Division III school to play basketball out of high school. Broke my arm in 6 places. Decided
my gosh.
maybe choosing a college based on where you play basketball was the best idea. And then I woke up and transferred. And then with running, I took as far as I could, and then broke my left hip with a half mile to go in the Boston Marathon. And
oh my gosh, you broke your hip during the marathon?
Half mile to go. I had another injury, but I rehabbed it. And then I started to experience some pain mile 16. I knew going into it, I said, if I really start to feel badly, I'm going to drop it. But I kept going. And then I was in Kenmore Square and I could not move. It wasn't painful. I was just paralyzed. And had this great doctor who got the head of orthopedic trauma surgery to do the surgery the next day. It was 7 months of physical therapy, 3 days a week. Hospital for on crutches for 4 months. But if you're going to break a hip, that's a great place to do it. So I got
I'm sure they're ready for it too. I volunteered at the finish line at the marathon and have seen people come across in all different conditions. And my hat is off to you for running like that. That's incredible.
It was a great experience. And, she went to the head of the BAA, got me a finisher's medal, mailed it, got on Father's Day, which was really nice. And he called me because he said, I've been doing this for over 30 years, and you're the only one who ever questioned this time saying that you didn't finish. Because he said, we get 300 runners a year saying, my time was off by 3 seconds. And I emailed him because I said, you show me as finishing, but I'm in the emergency room at Mass General. And so I thought you'd want to know. She was tremendous. Visited me every day in the hospital, saw my family, the whole thing. So great care. But I was glad I did it. And now just can't run outdoors.
Hey, it's all about adapting. As we get older, just do the same kind of thing, but adapt it so that you can do it longer. This has been fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us, Joe. I'm honored that you agreed to be on this podcast. Please, everyone who's listening, check out Joe's website, his podcast, Retirement Wisdom Podcast. So thank you for joining us.
Great to be here. I love your podcast, as you know. Follow it. You get some great guests, and appreciate the opportunity to talk with you again today.
Thank you. That's our show for today. If it helped you think differently, will you help me? Go to the Seniority Authority page in your podcasting app and hit either the plus, heart, favorite, or subscribe button so you don't miss out. And tell your friends so we can spread the word. Until then, enjoy the opportunity to get smarter about growing older. That's our show for today. If you liked it, please tell your friends so we can reach more minds and keep the conversation going. Or follow us on social at Seniority Authority. I'm Kathleen Toomey. Until next time, enjoy your chance to get smarter about growing older.